Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Debt Free Degrees. My name is Kate Wexell, and I'm the founder of the Compass College Consulting, which means that I'm here to help you find your perfect college and graduate debt free. So, in the last podcast episode, I briefly talked about endowments and how that worked too. However, I realized after thinking about it that endowments are not really a subject that is explained very often. I know during my full time job, I actually work in nonprofit fundraising where I help to raise money for the Boy Scouts in Northern California. And so I'm actually in charge of helping to raise money for our endowment. But before I started this role, I actually didn't know how endowments worked either. So I know that college endowments are truly flamed on the internet. And so if you look up college endowments on the internet, the first thing that's going to pop up is literally how there are some private colleges that have like billions and billions of dollars in their endowment. And then there are also going to be all sorts of articles talking to university chancellors saying, hey, why don't we dip into our endowment to help cover stuff for low income students, to help cover stuff to upgrade technology, to upgrade buildings, to provide aid to different things. Heck, I even actually had a friend in the past, not anymore, but they ended up going to a school, like a liberal arts school out in Iowa. And so this school is really, really known for some of their progressive measures on unions and really, truly fighting a lot to help protect student workers. And so one of the things that they were trying to do is they were saying, oh, the minimum wage of student workers needs to be raised. And they were asking for a raise that was far, far above what is actually appropriate for a school in Iowa in comparison to the actual state's minimum wage. However, they were just saying, why don't we just look into the endowment? Why don't we just get money from there? Well, here's the thing, folks. That's not actually how it works. So, what is a college endowment? A college endowment is essentially just a big pool of money that's donated to a school that's invested to generate income. And so then the income is used to support the school's operations, including scholarships, faculty salaries, and research projects. All right, so that's the summary. Bam. You know exactly what this is now. Pretty much, it's a collection of donated funds that are invested to grow over time. The purpose is that endowment funds are used to support long term missions of the school, ensuring financial stability and funding key programs. And then you can take a look at how large, big, prestigious private schools have multi billion-dollar endowments, and then a lot of smaller schools also have endowment funds, but they might not be as large. Right? So it's easy to poke fun at those large endowments and just think that it's that simple, but really it's not. And so, first, we have to understand a couple of key terms to see how endowments are structured. So, pretty much, there is a principal amount, and then there are earnings that an endowment receives. An endowment is a financial structure that's usually conducted through a brokerage. And so there is the principal amount. So these are original donations that make up the endowment. So pretty much every time that somebody gets a phone call saying, hey, we're the Alumni Association of Yale. Would you like to donate to our endowment this year? You can help to make sure that kids are able to receive a great education for generations. And when people send in $20, that would count as some of the principal donations. And then you put it into an account. It's a brokerage account, which means that it's usually invested in different stocks and other assets. And then you receive earnings. And so the earnings are a percentage of the investment that is used every year. And so that allows for the principal to grow over time, and then pretty much the extra amount, those are the earnings. And so with the earnings, that's the only part that nonprofits and specifically universities can actually use, right? So you can't just go dipping into the $13 billion in an endowment. You can only utilize the earnings, which is usually about 4 to 5% of the actual growth that has been received in a certain year. And so then from that point, it's not even just as straightforward as saying, like, oh, we received $5 million in earnings this year. Can't we just give that all to low income students? Because unfortunately, there is another thing that I am very familiar with within nonprofit fundraising, and those are restricted funds versus unrestricted funds. So if a donor then responds to the person calling them from the Alumni Association, and they're like, yeah, you know what? I have a lot of extra money this year. My company did really well. I want to donate $50,000. Then they can also follow that up by saying, either just use it for whatever purpose you want, which would be unrestricted funds. And that would be money that the school could very well just give it all to low income students. Or those might be restricted funds. This person could say, I'll donate $50,000, but I want it to specifically be used for a scholarship for engineering students. So now, any amount of growth that is received from those earnings, that all has to go specifically to a scholarship for engineering students. And so here's what I've also learned about donors from working with them is that a lot of the time donors want something very specific to contribute to. So while an endowment with unrestricted funds is important and that gives a university flexibility, like come on, who doesn't want for their name to be on a scholarship, right? Like, that's just cool. And so, next, let's talk about investment strategy. So, colleges will actually hire investment professionals to manage endowment portfolios. And so, pretty much once the initial donations are made, which once again is called the principal, within this brokerage account, you will end up seeing that invested into a variety of stocks. So this could be like your S&P 500. This could be, if they really wanted to, if these investment professionals were stupid, they could just say, we're putting all the money into Apple, right? We're buying Apple stocks, or we could be buying Boeing stocks, right? But it'll usually be a portfolio of a combination of hundreds, if not thousands, of different stocks. Then there are bonds, there's real estate, and then there's private equity. So there are people who are controlling this. And so what that means, though, is that all of these things are long term investments, right? You don't just buy a house and then wait for it to have gained $1 in value and then turn around and sell it, right? And so that's why, with a lot of these investments, you can only take that small percentage, right? It's not like there's just money sitting in a bank for an endowment. It's all tied up in these assets that you have to hold for decades. And so, why do they do this? Well, it's taking a look at a variety of different types of investments. And so that ends up reducing the amount of risk. So, the more diverse your investments are, and this is just true for general finances and even your own personal finances, the more different types of things that you invest your money in, the less risk you're going to have. And so that will ensure that over time, the economy always ends up growing over decades and centuries, even if there is an immediate recession that might, tank stocks or it might tank real estate, but it's not going to take everything at the exact same time. So that's why you'll still be fine and they'll still be seeing all of these returns over the long term. And so then now let's get to the spending policy. So as I said earlier, usually most endowments, this isn't just university endowments. I know the endowment that I take care of, this is also the rule for it. Most schools follow a rule of spending about 4 to 5% of the endowment's total value annually. And so this makes sure that the endowment actually remains sustainable and continues to grow. And so usually what the income goes toward is, once again, if there are restricted funds, then those have to be paid out in the way that they were designated. So that could be scholarships, that could be campus maintenance and buildings, that could be special programs that somebody has given towards. And then after that, usually the rest of the income will go towards financial aid, faculty salaries, research grants, campus maintenance, student services, and different programs like arts and athletics. So, all of the typical things that you would think of within a university, it's not being spent in a nefarious way. It's just that the funds can only be spent with that 4 to 5%. So, whatever the 4 to 5% of the endowment is, that's all that they get. And so, what does this really mean? Well, it means that all of our hopes and dreams of just cashing out $13 billion of an endowment, like that's kind of out of reach. However, what that means is that for people who have my job, they actually have more motivation to continue doing their job and asking donors to contribute to the endowment, because the larger that the endowment is, the more money that 4 to 5% ends up being when it's returned back to the school. And so then how do endowments affect financial aid? Well, for schools with larger endowments, that means that schools like Harvard and Yale can offer these very, very generous financial aid packages, and they can actually admit students without considering their financial need, right? Like if a student has a family income under a certain amount, it's pretty much just like they can offer free tuition because they have so much money pouring out of their endowment each year. And then some schools, they'll end up using those endowment funds specifically to meet 100% of demonstrated financial need. And so that ends up reducing student debt. So overall, they're doing a good service to society. Added on to that, some of these schools with the large endowments can even replace loans with grants for low and middle income students. So all of this ends up helping, but that's only a select couple dozen of schools who are able to do that. And so those policies are when a school is able to meet full demonstrated financial need. So if you take a look on the internet and just look up a list of schools that meet full demonstrated financial need and specifically look at need blind schools, then those are schools that if you meet their criteria, they will just take you in, welcome you, and give you that $0 tuition. And so then let's turn to some of the criticisms because even though I just said a lot of really, really great things about endowments, there are still things to end up complaining about, and that's mostly just the wealth inequality that ends up occurring. Right. So, at a lot of these private schools that are wealthy enough to have these large endowments, you can also take a look at their legacy admissions policies. So, usually about 30 to 40% of their freshman student bodies are legacy admits. Usually, about 30 to 40% of the student bodies came from the top 1% of household incomes in the entire United States, if not the world, right? So, why is that? Well, it's because to create a strong endowment, as I said, you have to have regular donations from alumni. And I know from doing my job, right, like my goal is not going to be raising tens of millions of dollars each year for an endowment, but my goal might be for the size of my organization in my region to fundraise maybe about three to $500,000 per year from donors. And so while it's nice to get those handful of $100 donations, that's really not going to move the needle. So, what I end up doing on a daily basis is reaching out to people who I know can give $25,000 or $50,000 or $100,000 all at once. And how do you end up getting those kinds of donations from alumni? Well, first of all, that means that you have to have a more selective admissions process where you're only targeting students in high school who you know will end up becoming super successful and rich multimillionaires and multi-billionaires. And you do that so that you know that they can give back to your school when the time comes. What that also means is that you end up wanting to admit some of their kids and their grandchildren and all of these other super wealthy kids who have already been in this specific social strata so that, it's like, well, I went to Harvard and now you let in my daughter and you let in my grandchild. And so, wow, now we all have these fond memories of Harvard and I'm so pleased with you as a school. So now we're all going to give back to you, right? It creates more of an incentive from alumni to give back, to have some of those very demeaning policies that end up concentrating these huge little pockets of wealthy elite in one place. And so it ends up just creating this gap within society between the haves and the have nots. And that's been one of the biggest criticisms of the endowment that is completely valid. So, then a useful metric to actually assess a school's wealth and to see if they're spending that endowment money well or if they're just trying to target wealthy people and keep them within a little loop of Ivy League success, you can take a look at the endowment per student ratio. And so, what that means is within the endowment, what percentage of it is spent on each student. And so, the higher that is, and the more resources and financial aid that are provided per student, usually the better that is, and the more ethically the money is being spent. However, the lower that it is, you can kind of assume maybe it's all just kind of for. However, in reality, when you're actually looking at it from just the nonprofit management viewpoint and looking at the financial health of a nonprofit in general, endowments are pretty important and they do have a lot of benefits, and that would include better financial aid, improved facilities and services, and then a lot of long-term stability to make sure that universities are able to stay intact even during economic downturns. Anyway, I hope that this was super informative for you. I end up creating a new episode of Debt Free Degrees every single Monday, and then I release YouTube videos with a slightly different twist every single Tuesday. You can also take a look at my college consulting services at thecompass.online and follow me on other social media platforms at thecompass.online. Anyway, thank you so much for listening, and I hope you have a great rest of your week.